Well, good afternoon, Guam, and welcome to the after party. Of course, we do the after party by popular demand twice a month now. Once we at the end of the month, last Monday, we do it on KUAM News, where you would normally see the lovely Jason Salas with the extra portion. We jump on there, and then the second Monday of every month, we do it for Facebook Live here. So, our guests on the after party, we have a former Senator, Dr. Nerissa Underwood.
Have a day.
From the Independence Task Force, also professor at the University of Guam, Dr. Michael Bevacqua.
Half a day.
Julius Caesar Santos, of course. And I'm Chris Barnett, and we'll just get right into it. With the natives are restless. It looks like the military buildup. I mean, this is a process that's been well over a decade in the making, and as we get closer and closer, frustrations and the sense of urgency has really made for a lot of headlines over the last, I've got to say 3 to 4 weeks. And there's just been so many developments. Things have been happening pretty fast, and we'll just start with you, Nerissa. Your thoughts on maybe on some of these activists coming to the forefront and trying to hold the governor's feet to the fire.
Well, actually, I was involved with the first go-around when this was about 10 years ago,
Right.
when we thought that it was going to happen. I think in 2010 or we started 2008, and we were collecting. So, as part of that process, I thought that we gave our best shot in providing input, and of course, all the estimates were really over the top. 35,000 people. They were asking me as superintendent, how many schools are you going to need to be able to accommodate the dependents?
Right.
So my impression was that after they came out with the impact statement, and it seemed a couple of years ago everything was set, now there are more discoveries about actually where they're excavating.
Right.
And so I am really with a position that we have to respect the land. And so while there had been studies that had been conducted in the past, those cannot be held true if they didn't do a good job in the first place. So, the governor has to stand with the people of Guam.
She's not, though. She's said that she's not going to ask for an overall pause on construction at the firing range. And I think there's just so many different issues going on here, Maguette, that it's hard for these activists and these community groups to kind of laser focus on any one issue, because there's just so many things going on. There's the environmental concerns, there's the Seriantes tree, and then, more recently, there's concerns that were raised by the former SHPO who, may or may not have lost their job over these things, about the treatment of ancestral sites and the process that's laid out in the programmatic agreement. And I think that was kind of like, I don't want to say it's the straw that broke the camel's back, but when people were getting pictures of these sites and seeing how they were, plowed through in this, and that's, maybe an oversimplification. But the process in the programmatic agreement of when they are bulldozering along and they come across a site, they're supposed to stop work, notify the SHPO, submit a work plan, and then do what's called data recovery, which is kind of pick up everything and store it for display at a later date, a later location. So that's the process in the programmatic agreement. So I guess now there are two schools of thought in, we have to follow the programmatic agreement, and those who say, we didn't have any say in it, throw it out, and let's start over, or let's maybe come up with some way to address these grievances.
It's true, and you can definitely see sort of how overwhelming it is in the response of the Magahagan, the response of Lou when the community groups approached her. And, she said something which was very insightful. First, she said, I'm the governor of a territory, a colony. I don't have the power to do anything about this.
Right.
And then I think so it's true in a way.
Yeah.
But the problem then is, especially in a room full of concerned sort of community members and activists, you want that to be the start of the conversation, not the end.
Right.
Which means, and so Lou had argued then that she's going to push for decolonization, because on Guam in particular, because you could live in Wyoming and you could basically not have any interaction with the U.S. military bases in Wyoming. It's a big state, not a lot of people. You could even live in California and be in a place where there's no U.S. military presence whatsoever. But in Guam, 212 square miles, 29% of that U.S. military bases, it's a huge part of the island. It's a huge part in so many ways. And so it's natural that the people would expect that it wouldn't just happen. That the military can't just say, you know what, we want to put 10,000 more people there because it's in our interests. And so Lou is in a tough place because she doesn't have a lot of power. So in a way she needs to, if she wants to kind of make some change, she's going to have to kind of protest a little bit.
But does she want to? Does she want to go to bat for these activists and these community groups? I don't think she does.
I think that she may want to, just because Lou wasn't elected sort of on a platform that she's going to be the person who's going to sell the island off, right? She got elected more on sort of the ideas of family, of community, and a lot of sort of Chamorro cultural advocates.
Let's not forget she had a really weak opponent.
Well, and so...
well, at least one.
I'm
I'm just saying, a lot of people read so much into why Lou won the election, and I think, on its face, it was people didn't want Ray Tenorio as governor. Some people wanted Frank Uggan as governor, but he didn't, run in the right. I mean, running as a right, and he did a tremendous job. He got so much support.
So one reason why Lou should be cautious is because this is something that did in Camacho in a certain way. Was that Felix Camacho sort of handled the buildup in the way sort of the military was probably whispering to him. Just do what we say. Guam is gonna get a lot of money out of this. Just sort of go along with it, sort of submit the reports, submit comments. And then he even learned then that sort of a lot of what had been promised in terms of Guam getting grants, access to funding, it never materialized. And so Lou kind of has to learn the same lesson, is that you're elected the leader of Guam. And that means that the military in Guam can have overlapping interests sometimes, but also we define our leaders by how much they protect our community, how much they stand up for our community, not by how willing they are to let somebody else sort of dictate things.
So I thought it was interesting in that I felt, and I watched the whole meeting, I felt that the bit where she said, we're a territory, we can't really do anything, I almost felt as if that was her kind of appealing to that crowd of these people who, you were there, all the independence people were there.
Like
so
pandering to the crowd?
Right, maybe pandering to them. And when that didn't really work, she went with it's national security. Which, kind of backfired, right? And I want to turn it over to Julius because I know that he has his own feelings about the buildup and the national security part, where the governor basically said, hey, I'm in these meetings, you guys aren't in these meetings, the military is telling me they're worried about China, they're worried about North Korea, and that was kind of her mic drop. I felt like in that meeting, that was her mic drop, like, hey, yeah, all this stuff is really cool, but at the end of the day, national security.
It's very interesting now. I'm glad that you came to me with that point, but I'll preface what I'm going to say by what you said earlier, Mike, I think is important, where that meeting with the governor was the start of the conversation. And there's an element, a huge element missing to the conversation, and that's for the people who were in support of the buildup. And I think at the end of the day, we all want the same thing. We all want to preserve and protect our culture with respect to the Chamorro culture. And I'd like to say the biggest difference is, and this is not a despairing, what I'm about to say is not disparaging, it's more of an observation that I made, is those in support of the buildup were willing to compromise and make sacrifices, whereas those who are protesting seem like they do not want any kind of compromise when it comes to this buildup. I'm not saying it's right or wrong or it's good or
no,
bad.
you bring
It's
up a
just
good, I kick myself agreeing with you, but you do bring up a good point, and that is that these activists and these community groups, it's all or nothing.
Right.
You're right. I mean, they want, and maybe not all or nothing, maybe that's an oversimplification, but I feel like
90-10.
there are things that we could ask for, you know?
Yeah.
I mean, we're asking
Absolutely.
for, the governor feels like it's an impossible thing to do, you know what I mean? We're asking her to go and ask. I totally disagree. I think if we're a territory, but the leader of this territory stands on a box and makes a lot of noise about the federal government ignoring our concerns, it's gonna get attention. I mean, she could get attention from Time Magazine for wanting to bring an abortion doctor to Guam. Then she could get attention for saying, "Hey, we don't have a seat at the table. We're left out."
Right.
So I think it was a cop out for her to say that.
Right.
Oh, we're a
Well,
colony.
And I will address that though, but I wanted to address the fact that the conversation is not one-sided. It's just that the side that's in support of the buildup, they either don't want to publicly express their opinion, or they just don't care enough to do that, right? And I think their concerns are just as valid as those who have decided to speak out. And so with respect to the national security, it is true. I mean, I've been following China's activities globally, and they are actively bankrupting countries so that when the countries, they are actively flooding countries with billions of dollars, and when the countries can't pay them back, they renege on the contract. Now China controls strategic access in each of these countries. It's called the One Belt Road Initiative, right? So they're trying to recreate the Silk Road of historic times.
No, and you see it,
Just an
man.
example.
I've been in
And so-
to Yap. You go to Yap,
Yeah.
you go to Palau. There's
Chu,
so much
even.
Chinese investment. CNMI. I mean,
Yeah,
they're
absolutely.
right there. So
Right, and we see that every day with their casino and
I mean, they're here in
activities that
Guam.
go
They're
on.
running the casino.
And I'm not saying all Chinese people are bad, but with respect to their government, what the Communist Party is doing, they're pretty blatant about it. North Korea, President Trump, although saying his name itself can be contentious, he was the first U.S. president to ever step foot in North Korea. So he's doing what he can to ease the tensions there, because you got Russia, China, North Korea, they're all in cahoots. And so we're like smack dab, we're the tip of the spear, so to
Right.
speak. We're right here.
So let's get
It's a-
Dr.
But I'll say
on
that's
this.
the reason why that is being cited. I don't think it's a cop-out. Maybe, I'm not saying for her, but the strategic position, the geopolitical positioning for the defense of the rest of the nation, because I think we're so isolated, we don't think of everybody else that's under the protection. And
So-
with there, pass to you.
I would just caution that, because if we look at the biggest historical example that we have, which is World War II, and when it hits Guam, what was communicated to the Chamorro people at that time was completely different than what the U.S. military actually felt. So when Chamorros asked the U.S. Navy, is Japan going to attack us? Are we in danger? The U.S. Navy said, no, you guys are fine. Japan would never challenge us. I came across Ernest Hemingway's accounts of when he passed through Guam in 1941, and he said that the Navy officers here called the Japanese worthless monkeys who would never dare to challenge the white man. And they laughed. Now, as that was happening, they were pulling forces out, and they were talking about what we're going to do, and they were planning for an eventual Japanese attack, but they did not include the local population in the conversation.
Right.
Now, those Chamorros who had friends who were the governor, the Navy governor, they got told on the side, store food, because we're going to get attacked any day now. And so it's relevant today, because whatever they tell the governor, whatever they tell us, you have to remember that that may not be what they're actually planning, it may not be what they're actually doing, and so we have to have the ability to think for ourselves. Because when Lou said that there's a threat from North Korea, I'm like, well, according to President Trump, we don't have to worry about North Korea.
Yeah.
Because him and Kim Jong-un are like BFFs.
They're like this.
They're like top sharer on Facebook.
Right.
And so, but then so on the one hand, you have part of the U.S. government saying, we don't got to worry about North Korea anymore. And then on the other hand, we say this is a dangerous super threat. And so that's why we would want from Lou, from the Magahaga, from other leaders, the ability to kind of look at the situation and come up with what is Guam's interests in this.
Right.
What is
Nerissa,
Guam's
I'm
place in
I'm
this?
curious what your thoughts are on this
Well-
national security thing.
Well, my whole thing is that as the governor, she really can't approach this from a dichotomous point of view. It's not an either or issue.
Right.
The national interest of Guam should be her primary interest, not just the national security in relation to
Right.
being protected militarily, but first and foremost, she has to know who she is and what it is that she stands for in her community.
Right.
And that's her responsibility. It's not just to
Do what the U.S.
do
says.
what the U.S. says,
Right, yeah.
but she has to balance that, and
Yeah.
that's her job as a leader.
And I think one thing we're not hitting on in this discussion is this idea that if we go to the military and say, hey, we want to make sure that our environment is being treated properly, we want to make sure that our ancestral sites are
Right.
being treated fairly, we want to have more involvement in the way these sites are investigated and handled. If we do those things, the military is not going to pack up and split. And that was kind of like the premise that I
That's
felt the
right.
governor was operating under,
Right.
that, oh my God, you activists, if you come and you ask for all these things, they're just going to leave. And then what about our national security?
Right.
So I think that she's
It's
well
true.
within her rights to make the ask, like she said. And
That's
I
right.
felt that this notion that, and you see this a lot with people, you're very familiar with the people who hate on independence. They say, oh, what about the U.S. is going to leave? And I think there's a certain amount of wiggle room that we have. I think that
Oh,
we're
absolutely.
actually dealing from a position of strength.
Even if you're somebody who supports statehood for Guam, you should still want a strong governor who will stand up for Guam.
Yeah.
And even if you're for free
That's not
association for independence, regardless of what you are, you want your leader empowered that if there is something which may potentially injure the island, harm the island, not be great for the island, you want them to feel empowered. And even all three of those statuses would give the governor, the legislature, the people a little bit more power over something such as this. Even as a state, you would have voting representatives in Washington, D.C. You would have a delegation which could lobby as one with their votes on your behalf to try to defeat certain things that you don't like as independents. As
Right.
independent or freely associated, you'd have agreements, you'd have
Sure.
treaties,
And
all
I think the
sorts of
federal
things.
government's aware of our inadequacies in this area, because I've seen the docs where they say that our status as a territory gives them maximum flexibility for this buildup. So obviously there are reasons why they're pushing this buildup on a territory, because, you know, they couldn't do it in Okinawa anymore, and there's other places in the U.S. where they're just not gonna have it, you know, so.
So there's 2 points, because you brought up one point that's not being hit on. There are 2 other points that's not being hit on. The third one that I wanted to mention was the fact that, again, we're assuming that the governor needs to speak only for the activists, whereas there's a huge chunk of the population that does support this. And that leads me to one of the points that we're not hitting on is, I know that money, again, the involvement of money, just people just kind of show that contempt, but there are small contractors. The majority of them are being subcontracted by the prime contractors. These are business owners that leverage their personal assets to start their companies. Every day that passes by that they're not working, that they didn't plan for as far as their cash flow, they lose out, the potential to lose their companies, the locals working for them lose their jobs. And I know that these conversations kind of just get blown to the side.
Right.
But these are people's livelihoods. So how do we balance that?
Sure.
Again, because it's
But
all
I don't
about
think we
making a
balance it by
compromise.
allowing the military to just bulldoze through
And
everything.
this is the second part that I bring to is the fact that we have, and this is where people, again, they'll shut me out or whatever, and that's fine, but this is how I see it, how I've come to see it over the years. I'm looking at this thing and trying to figure out exactly where I stand, but we actually have the ability to protest the military of the government, of our government. And when you look around the world, there are not many countries that can actually do that and get away with it as far as their citizenship. So I'm like humbled by the fact that we can do that. I look at the protesters standing and blocking traffic up at Anderson. Like any dictatorial government, they would have just been shot. You know what I mean? Like, get out of our way. So I'm humbled by the fact that they have that freedom, the liberty to do that. And that may sound like whatever, aloof, but to me, it's at the core of what's happening. And so I bring it back to the fact where it's like, where's the compromise then? Tell us exactly what you want, lay it out, because there was one site, there was protests, they moved it, now they're trying to do it on base.
Right, yeah. But
There's more and the only reason why we're making these discoveries is because they're actively doing construction work and they're clearing
Right.
land. I mean, what
Yeah.
about the rest of Guam that was developed? What about where we're sitting right now in this building? What was
yeah,
here
but I
before
think
that?
if the time to be vigilant is now, then the time is now. If
Sure.
and because we may have missed things before, I think
So-
it means
Yeah,
that we should be
absolutely.
more
Yeah.
I'm not,
vigilant
and
now. Right.
I'm not saying that.
But
they're
I
wrong.
got
Yeah.
on the economic argument. I mean, the governor herself, who, I mean, she freaking owns a bank, she doesn't buy into the economic argument.
Sure, but
She had
I'm not
brought
talking
about
about-
the issue of the carpetbaggers, so
Right.
I thought that was interesting, and that was something that
Even-
But
we
I-
kind of glossed over.
She can bring up that point. However, the fact is there are local contracting
Sure,
companies
yeah.
that are working on this project who are local business owners who employ other locals. And so we have to incorporate that into this whole thing. Like this is their livelihood. I'm not addressing the fact that, oh, are we going to make billions or not? I'm addressing the fact that this is really happening. These local companies are hired.
Yeah.
They have local
But-
employees. What's going to happen
I think
if
even
that goes
if,
under? That's their
even if
livelihood.
even if you want the buildup and believe that it's going to bring a good economic benefit to the island, you still want your governor to actually stand up. Because one of the reasons is that the buildup as it is now, and the military's own studies make it clear, that Guam benefits in a very marginal way. Because the number of 7 billion, 6 billion that comes into the island, just a small fraction of that actually goes to the subcontractors, that goes in indirect spending the economy.
Sure, but how does that make what the subcontractors are earning invalid? Again, that's for their
No,
livelihood.
but-
It's not
But
like
the
they're walking
reason
away
why
twisting
is,
their mustaches.
so the
saying,
problem
"Yeah,
is that
you know."
it's actually a really bad deal for Guam. And the military, their studies always made it clear
How is
that
it bad
Guam,
for Guam?
because if you, so
I think if you
look
go
at
back and you read the military's own words and the socioeconomic impact statements. I mean, they say it in it's plain English. That
Yeah, they make clear direct jobs are in construction. They come and they go, and
That's the
most
nature
of
of
them
the
will go.
construction
And most of
industry.
them will go to off-island companies. And then they also say that indirects in other jobs that are made will largely go to dependents of people in the military. And so, but even if so, let's say you support it. Let's say you want it. You have to look at it and think actually that Guam is benefiting in a very small way from it because we never stood up and we never pushed. We never actually argued for a better deal. We
Right.
were too busy saying that we support the buildup,
Yeah.
we
Right.
like the buildup, and we love America. Because the programmatic agreement is a perfect example of that. It was signed, but people that have been working with the military using the programmatic agreement for years say the military doesn't even really follow their part of the bargain.
right.
That and at the meeting with Magahagalu, they're supposed to they've promised that sort of cultural resources, like if they harvest native trees, they're supposed to make them available to artisans, to cultural practitioners, and they
You mean
threw
like
away.
EFIT that they
Yeah.
bulldoze?
They threw away most of them, and they worked with community groups such as Ulitau to identify the trees which were perfect for canoes, and then the military just threw them away
Right.
and gave
and
them.
it's not surprising. Like
It's
really,
not
I don't.
surprising,
I mean, it's 2019. We have decades of the military doing what the military does, and that's their interest, right? They're not looking out for us. They're not trying to make us money. Their interest is national security, and
Well, when we say
whatever the
national
military does.
security, that's the security of the entire nation to include its territories. And again,
It doesn't-
maybe it's
it
just the
doesn't
way I see
actually-
it, but the fact that, again, we have the freedom to protest against them.
It
And
doesn't
you look
actually
historically throughout,
include the,
the entire
territories.
globe.
That's normally it doesn't include the territories.
well, we have the liberties here to pursue our life. We're here talking on a podcast, you know what I mean? You get to.
Yeah, but
you're
I
at the
mean to say
university.
that
And
we're
I'm-
here talking on a podcast means that we should just shut up and take it.
No,
It's-
that's not what I'm
it's-
saying.
it's not.
Because I said, I think we all want the same thing. It's just those who want the buildup are willing to make compromises and sacrifices. They're not just going to say, do whatever you want.
That's where I agree with you. I think
You
that
know?
if these activists and community groups, I mean, to call for a complete pause and everything,
Well,
people
at least
have their
submit a
feelings
plan
around it,
if you're
right?
going to say that.
You're
So it
right,
says,
and
"This
so
is what
say,
we
hey,
want."
for the ancestral sites, we want to be more involved. We want to have more, oversight on it. I think that's
Lay out
you're
an
right. There
actual
should
plan
be
and put it-
some sort of plan as opposed to just like, no, stop everything.
Right.
Because I think against the buildup, that boat has sailed. It's happening. You know what I mean? Whether we like it or not. And I think we need to find these concessions and fight for them. And I mean, I really do applaud these activists and community groups because they're bringing up valid points
Yeah.
and they're getting thrown under the bus for
We,
it.
we need that voice because people can get jaded. Those who are contemporary, living their lives today, we can get jaded. We can forget about the value of the aspect, the ancient artifacts and the flora and the fauna. With that said, though, it's like, okay, we need to have a balance between how do we keep our people moving forward into the future while bringing along what is important to us of our traditions and our culture. The plan would be really great so that they could spell out exactly what it is that they want, so we can save a lot of people.
But I mean,
time
and
and
they're
effort.
and not to speak for them, but I think their mentality is that so much has gone wrong that it's prudent to just stop and reassess. That's kind of like the whole gist of what.
And
what
I
the
think, but it's
closet's
easy for them
asking
to say that, but
Yeah.
the big picture is like, it's the entire nation, and the whole time, federal dollars, we have to remember, are American taxpayer dollars, you know what I mean? So it's like the money's coming out of our pocket essentially, so every time we ask them to halt, now the military is causing the pause, now they have to pay the contractors, and there's all this really
Yeah, but
complex
if
issues
you
that
ask
go
them to
on.
halt because they're doing things they shouldn't be doing, that's totally well within.
I know,
right,
so
yeah.
how do you balance that moving forward? There's a
Well,
group
I
that,
think right
there's
now
a
it's
group
not
that
being
firmly
balanced, so
believes.
we
Yeah,
do need
sure.
to somehow.
I think that calling for a pause is a middle ground because it's not like people are saying kick the military
Understood.
off the island,
Yeah,
close
good
all the
point.
bases.
Valid point.
So calling for a pause is a very good compromise because every time somebody challenges me and says, "Oh, you're so anti-buildup," or "You're so," I'm like, no. The reports that come out of the construction are very anti-buildup. Because every time you hear a report that, some contractors accidentally bulldozed some stuff because no one was with them to tell them that is actually, those are artifacts. Like, no, the rationale that you need for why they're not following their own rules, why they're not following their own procedures is just being reported in the media. All the activists are doing are saying, based on this fact, that last year there was the destruction of Magua, which in NICTAMs, which the military knew it was there, but they still bulldozed through it, taking some of the stuff away, and that there's still been more destruction of different areas now, better pause. I mean, for me personally, I feel like they're just trying to rush through it before, I don't
Yeah.
know, before Trump takes the money to build the wall in Mexico.
Yeah.
Because that was one of the proposals,
Right,
was
yeah.
that the money for the buildup be siphoned off to go to build the border wall. And so they're trying to kind of push it through and ram it through as quickly as they can before something changes in Washington.
Nerissa?
Yeah, you know, but the reality is that, okay, we just received notice that the admiral had denied their request to
Right,
halt. So
right.
now what?
Yeah.
What's the resolution now from the legislature? What are the activists going to do? What's the governor going to do?
Oh wait, so on Wednesday at 5 p.m. there's a protest. There's
Oh,
a demonstration.
Hey, this just in.
Yeah. Fresh
You
off
heard
WhatsApp.
it here first.
Hot
Right,
off the
yeah.
WhatsApp press.
Yeah, Mike. So I gotta ask, cause, and I know all these activists, and I've, you know, in covering this issue, I have to be in contact with them, and I knew before they sat down, because we had reported on it, that the governor had no intention of asking for a complete pause in the firing range, and we have these senators doing this resolution,
Yeah.
which is
So-
to ask the governor to ask the military to do something she's not gonna do. She said she's not gonna do it.
And so now what is the legislature
Right.
going to do?
So why not just make this resolution the legislature, which they've done before? They did a resolution in the last legislature. They said, hey, can we just have a pause? It's totally ignored. So maybe they figured, oh, well, it didn't work last time. Let's kind of fine tune it and ask
It's
the
a
governor.
pandering mechanism.
I guess it can be in a certain way, but let me just mention before
Yeah,
I forget.
protest,
So demonstration at Chief Kapua Circle, 5 p.m. on Wednesday. And so for those of you sort of that are concerned about issues of historic preservation, cultural resources, environmental protection, those of you that have concerns about the buildup, that want to sort of show our leaders sort of the support that you have in the community for protecting these sorts of things, feel free to come out Wednesday 5 p.m. Chief Kapua Circle. And so to that issue though, I mean, I'm hoping that Lou sees that it's to her advantage, just because when she mentioned carpetbaggers in the meeting,
That was crazy.
to me it was
I was
big.
pretty like, wow.
It was big, but
Because that's kind of woke. I mean, you know, I hate to borrow the term, but I was like, oh, Gov, that's kind of woke. But then on the other side, she's like national security, which is not woke.
and so even if you and I always tell people, even if you support the buildup, you should want the buildup to stop and to get redrawn and redone. You should want the government to be strong and stand up against it, because the way it is now, the military kind of does what they want. You look at how buildups work in other countries. If there's a treaty relationship between the countries, then they get to decide how much of the money goes for each country. So because Japan is paying for this, part of this, some of the money gets to go to Japanese contractors only. The US also has similar requirements. Guam has no such thing. So the US uses its own firms. They meet their obligations for other countries and their firms, and then they just subcontract if they can't do it themselves, if they don't have somebody they want to pay stateside or somewhere else, and so we get the crumbs. So it doesn't have to be like that. If the governor, if the legislature wanted to pass some laws to close carpetbagger
Right,
loopholes,
yeah.
they definitely could.
Good, yes.
They definitely could, but you don't do that by saying, I support the buildup. You have to pause, you have to reflect, you have to look. This buildup may benefit some on the island. Is it going to benefit a large majority of people? Is it going to benefit the island as a whole? And the way you look at it now, it doesn't pan out. It does benefit some. Yeah, absolutely. It
Right, and
provides some economic boost
Bart,
for
but
some.
what Julius is bringing up about this silent majority that supports the buildup in all ways, shape, and means. I don't think we see it. When we do see people who come out to support the buildup, you question their motives because they're either tied to the Chamber of Commerce or, like Senator Moylan, right? Some of the arguments he made, while some of them, I'm pretty sure he's going to get a lot of support for that, because you're right. A lot of people support the buildup, but it's probably because they don't have all the information.
Sure, that may or may not be the case for those.
And then when you get Senator Moylan coming out and saying that, oh, if it wasn't for the military, we wouldn't even know these sites existed. If they didn't bulldoze it, well, we wouldn't even be talking about it. It's just so naive.
You could say it's naive, but it's, I mean, how else would we have known that it was there if they weren't actually there?
I think
doing
we
the work?
all
But
knew
I
there
wanna
were
go back
sites
to
there.
I want to go back to the point,
So many
see, that was
points.
a good one, you're like, okay, so those who support the buildup, it's not strictly financial, right? There's, again, there are a lot of people out there who actually
Sure.
are humbled
right.
enough and they're grateful
Right,
for
yeah.
the fact that we can live our lives the way that we do. It sucks that there are these things that happen historically to Guam, but it's not unique to Guam. It's happened all over the world, throughout the world's history. And this is the only point in time where we're able to have these discussions openly and not fear for any kind of repercussions coming from the government or some kind of authoritarian leadership. And that's all kind of like out there, like, oh, what is he talking about? But really, at the end of the day, we have been so spoiled with the liberties that we've had, lacking whatever it else may be lacking. I think that it can kind of skew the conversation. So again, I think we all
This is
want
the
the same
status
thing
quo
to,
argument.
to
right?
preserve it. No, it's not status quo. It's. I mean, we can always improve. You mentioned Guam is just getting the crumbs. It's like you can look at it like that, or you can look at it like, well, okay,
Crumbs
if we're
of
not,
food.
if we're not actually going to get this, how can we maximize this, right, and use it to
Yeah.
get more out of it?
But you got to be against the buildup in order to do that. You have to be willing to be critical and
Right.
willing to say
You don't
no.
have
That's
to
the
be
other
against
thing.
it to be
Yeah, I
critical.
Willing
think,
to,
I think
that's the
You
thing
can
is
be
that if
supported and be critical.
I wish that there were more, because that always confounds me, because whenever I see people who don't own apartment buildings or who don't own construction companies say they're for the buildup, I'm always like, but why? And they say, oh, because of jobs. And I'm like, but you do realize that every study the military's ever done says that the buildup will cost you money. It's not going to give you any money. The buildup will cost you money because your rent will go up, your cost of living will go up, your time in traffic will go up, your utilities will go up, your wait time at the hospital will go up.
Which these are all things that the military's said themselves.
Yeah,
and all these
the
impacts.
military's own
Yeah,
studies
yeah, right.
say that your average person will not benefit in any way from the buildup, less so from the reduced buildup that they're putting forth. And so that's why I always say supporting it doesn't help you. You have to be willing to recognize our position in it, that we are in a subordinated position, and you kind of have to be against it, even if just temporarily, to open your mind to think, we deserve better.
Right, yeah.
We deserve better. And so, a pause.
Yeah, and
Take a
I gotta
pause.
dial back. What I mean,
Yeah.
what I
I mean, I
meant
still
when I
don't support
said
the pause, but-
what I meant when I said that they're not willing to compromise is I want to see more details and details that I think. I mean, God, who doesn't want to like preserve and investigate in a real archaeological way these sites up on the? Who doesn't want that? We're living in a friggin' renaissance. We have a museum. I don't think that there's anything wrong with that, and I also don't think that just because Julius doesn't agree, he wants to see them gunning the bulldozer through
Yeah.
all the sites up there. Yeah, I think there's a somewhere
So
in the
that's
middle.
that's what I was talking about. That it's not a dichotomous decision.
Right,
It's
right.
not that you're either for the buildup or you're not for the buildup. But what is being called to our attention is the need for us to pause and re-examine whether the rate by which change is happening is really the rate that we want to go with. And I think it also calls again attention to the fact that the right to self-determination really needs to be exercised. This is the optimum point,
Right.
because what another event, we're going to let this go, and then at what point will the leaders have the courage to call the vote out?
And that was another thing I thought was interesting that the governor had when she dropped that we're a territory, we can't really do anything.
No.
She said that's why I'm really supporting decolonization, which I totally disagree with. They have Melvin, and then they have another guy, Josh, who is split between the Commission on Decolonization and running errands for whoever in Adelut wants, or whatever he does. He's not a full-time decolonization employee. So I felt it was really disingenuous for Lou. I don't know who advises her on these things, but to say that, hey, we're a territory, we can't do anything unless we decolonize, that's why I support decolonization, but she doesn't. And none of you guys called her on it.
Well, I guess it is, yeah. I mean, we're hoping, that was one thing that I would hope would come out of it, though,
Yeah.
was that if she was on record saying that, then we could push for more funding and more support. Because, yeah, that office had at least 2 staffers and one principal for a long time.
Right.
And then now, for the past couple administrations, it's all these split, all schizophrenic sort of out-of-loop entities in 9
But it's
different
not
offices.
just a governor, it also requires for a delegate to be engaged in that.
Oh, he does, yeah.
And so at what
and that's-
point, when again
Right.
is that going to be pushed? I mean, every year there's an excuse.
I just don't see Congressman St. Nicholas, banging the hall down there, hey, we need decolonization. I just don't think I don't think he's ever said it's a priority.
It's interesting, sitting here listening to you guys, this new question just entered my head. It's like, and it's gonna sound really bad for a lot of people out there, but why is decolonization so important? How is that going to impact your life right now?
I mean, potentially. Well, I always say decolonization is one of those things that affects everything. We don't often realize it, but the most important thing is, of course, just the cost of everything that we buy. And so the Jones Act, sort of that, so different studies show stuff on Guam is 30%, 50%, 100% more expensive because of the Jones Act.
Right.
And
I'm
so-
just like, if you don't know why decolonization is important, then maybe you just should
Well,
read up on it. Yeah.
beyond the economic, because economic we can fix without, and I'm not saying to not decolonize, right? It's why is the status so important? We can fix economic issues without decolonizing, so to speak, right?
Some
Because
of
I
them
understand
can.
the Jones Act. I mean, I did a lot of research on it when I was working at GITA, and there are a lot of ways around it. It's we need to assert ourselves again. There's ways that we can assert ourselves. And again, this is not to say we should
Yeah.
not decolonize.
But there's way more ways why we can.
Yeah, but what is the purpose? Okay, like, because there's different perspectives. There's the independent, there's free association, there's the statehood. Like, why? What are the 3 different reasons why we
Go
should
ahead, Nerissa.
decolonize?
The right to self-determination is the right of every human being. It's an
Sure, but
inalienable
why is it
right.
important? I guess that's
It
the
is
question.
important to the identity of the group of people who have yet to exercise it. It is very important. You start with that as a premise. And so for historically, at what point have the Chamorro people have really exercised their,
We're doing
They're-
it today with the protests, where we're saying
Yeah.
we're Chamorros and we're protesting the building. So, and I'm not arguing against. I really want to know what's important so I can help make my own decision at the end of the day, because I'm not following anything. I'm thinking for myself. I'm trying to figure this out for myself.
Even people that are, so I always find it funny because even if you are more of a Chamber of Commerce type person and you are pro buildup and you sort of, there's lots of reasons to be in favor of decolonization.
Well,
Like,
well, earlier you said that most of the people who speak up who are in support are in the chamber. That's because these individuals actually have the strength of character to stand up and say something. They're
I think
entrepreneurs.
it's just far
or-
less. I think it's just they want to make money off it, and that's
Well, I
these
mean,
activists
you're
aren't making a
absolutely
dime.
right. They want to make money. They see an opportunity for business. It's more complex than just their bank accounts. They support.
Sure, and I
some
don't.
of them
I'm not
support
saying
hundreds
there's
of
anything
employees.
wrong with that.
Yeah,
I'm
no.
just saying that, like,
But
when
you have
somebody
to
speaks
admit-
up and they have a motive,
Mm.
then that makes me a little more cynical.
But you got to
and
admit
critical.
that business owners have been vilified in a lot of these different conversations that we have. It's like, oh, they're just doing it for the money, just doing it for the money. It's like, man, entrepreneurs and business owners, they're so stressed out with trying to make sure that their employees get paid every 2 weeks. I'm not saying they're the nicest people in the world, but they do have that responsibility to make sure their employees get paid.
I think we're going way off on a different.
But these are the different. This is the nuance of the
Right.
conversation. It's
I don't-
way more
yeah,
complex.
I don't think we're talking about. I mean, people
Sure,
they're doing
that's
it for
fine.
the money. That's what they're supposed to do, right?
That's
It's
what
business,
business owners
right?
do.
Yeah,
I
of
mean,
course.
if you're not making a profit, you can't sustain your business, which is.
But I
why-
want to go back to what Nerissa said. It was like
the identity.
decolonization. Yeah,
Yeah.
I agree with that, but that's not why I support. I think that being pro Guam, the best deal that we can get is going to be the one that we broker ourselves. And then,
Mhm.
I don't buy into
I agree
the,
with that.
colonized tiers. I don't feel like there's a physical pain that I'm living under because we're a colony, but I see how it affects everything. I mean, every facet of our life, from the cost of living to socioeconomic to immigration.
Structure of
I mean, it's
education,
all
immigration.
it's-
So
it's
wouldn't you
all
want to have
encompassing.
a say in all
Of course,
that?
totally.
Yeah.
I just don't, because I'm more practical, I don't think that decolonizing helps me with my identity. I'm
Yeah.
secure in my identity,
Okay.
but I think that for practical reasons and political reasons God, decolonization, it's a no-brainer. Everyone does, you think 10 years ago, it was one of those, divisive things, but now, I mean, it was a major issue in the campaign last year, so I think we've come a long way, and I fully support it. And
Even building off of that, part of the build-up conversation and then the conversation around Guam and our relationship to the U.S. military, you can see similar ways in which it's just evolved and it's matured. Because one of the things is if there's a huge presence on your island, is it better just to wave a flag and then kind of salute it as it does what it does? Even though it's this huge presence on your island, it has a huge say over what happens at the federal level. It has a huge say over what happens, how your island is perceived by those around you. Is it better to know about it, be willing to discuss it, its benefits, its flaws, or is it better to just kind of wave a flag and say, I support it. I support the troops. I support the buildup. And in the past, the community on Guam was really stuck in this mode where it's kind of like you can't question. You can't talk about those things. You can't challenge those things.
no, I mean, look at the conversation where it's still that way in a lot of ways.
No, I think it's shifted.
Well, why do you think in the past, like our grandparents' generation, why would they have that perspective? Because I thought about that a lot.
Yeah.
My grandfather never brought up the war in negative terms. He wasn't bitter about anything. He just like, I just had to keep moving on with my life.
And I think that's
best
part of
that we
that generation, because my grandfather was in the Insular Guard, so and his story is very interesting because he was in the Guard, and these were the people who, after the Americans started
Surrendered and
whatever, he was going around killing Japanese, you know what I mean? And he was pretty much a member of the U.S. military, but it took decades for him to be recognized as such, so he went his whole life, no health coverage, none of the bennies that, regular veterans get, and by the time he did get his honorary Marine status and, the veterans benefits, it was too late, he was sick. But my grandfather never whistled the Star-Spangled Banner out of his butt. He was not one of these people who was like, I'm so grateful. In fact, he didn't like the military. And we grew up and there was a saying, effing Marines. And I heard it from him, I heard it from so many other people. So I think like this idea that the older generation is just so great. They have their own thoughts on things.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I'm just saying, that's why I said that's what I learned.
Because we kind of,
Other people
operate on this
you
assumption
kind of
like,
inherit
our grandparents are just like so pro-American, and they were just, but they weren't really.
Not all of
Right.
them.
Yeah.
I
And
think it
actually,
was-
a lot of them were racist towards everyone else.
Right. Yeah.
I think
mean,
part of it
I'm not going to
was,
repeat some of the words I
Yeah.
had.
so I think part of it was that they had strong feelings, but that they didn't share them publicly.
Right.
That
Because
was the thing.
At
That
the
was
end of the
thing.
day, they just were glad to not be surrounded by bombs and bullets, and they were able to live their lives.
And there is
out.
that, of course.
Because
I mean, we'd be
they actually
naive
lived it,
to
so-
think that they weren't. There isn't a sense of gratitude, but I mean, like every year we offer up this gratitude on this liberation altar, and here we are 75 years later, still doing it and not enjoying the full benefits of the relationship that we want to. Nerissa?
No, you said it all.
Oh, that's it.
I agree with you. I will agree and say we're not enjoying the full benefits.
Right, and that's what really the gist of decolonization is. It's
The
not
caveat,
to show a middle finger to the
Right.
U.S. It's not. It's really just
But
to do what's
Chris,
best
it's not
for
just the
Guam.
identity. The identity is important for a
Right,
group
yeah.
of people.
Sure.
It just is. It's not
No, I agree
for
with
them
you, yeah.
to be empowered to participate
But
in
they-
making decisions.
Right.
That it's they who are determining which direction the island will go.
Just them or everybody?
Just them, just
Well, how
tomorrow's.
come they just them?
Tomorrow.
Because
Because
I'm
we were the
Chamorro
ones
too.
Because the
were
rest
wrong.
of us already have exercised.
But I'm Chamorro
our-
too, and I have a different perspective. So this is where the problem
Well,
is.
then that's where you vote.
Yeah,
Well,
You
we
guys
don't
vote.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, so I guess I was.
I
Because
mean,
when
I
you're
won't
saying
vote.
to have a voice in what happens,
I'm not
it's
going
like,
to
well,
vote.
we kind of put the people who are competent to make those decisions in place, right? Like, we're not in charge
Now
of
we're
the
talking about
finances
the
for the
policy.
company, because I guess I'm just trying to like define roles. Like, I wouldn't want
Right,
you know
yeah.
average Joe Cruz making decisions on things that are so complex that he has no idea what they're about. He's only looking at it face value and basing it on their emotions.
Well, that's
More-
why education is so important. Right.
to a certain degree, yeah, absolutely.
Education,
Are we gonna talk
dialogue
about
like
town hall?
this.
Oh yeah, let's talk about the town hall real quick. Let's wrap on this town hall. Like I
'Cause
mean,
that's a threat in our community, right? The
right.
cell phone.
So what are you guys' feelings on this town hall? This was, you know, I don't want to go through the whole background, but
Right.
spurred by this machete attack, and now we're going around all these different villages,
So the,
finding out they're not safe, which
so,
we already
so
know.
the one that I watched, for the most part, was the one in Dededo.
Right.
And what I really saw was a lot of talking from the officials. And I guess later on, you know, the community, but there was a lot of offensive, you know,
Right.
offense. Like
Yeah,
say,
on
we're
the
doing
offense.
on the offense.
Right, right, yeah.
We're doing this, and be sure that, remember that we all should just get along. We should
Right.
respect each other.
Right,
And
Rodney King.
But I
all
mean,
of
and
that,
that
right.
kind of preface is meant to diffuse anything that the people in attendance would have to say, but it didn't really work. So there were
No.
people who spoke after that. But I thought it was interesting. The first meeting, the governor she calls these meetings, she goes on a trip. The first meeting, it was just crazy. I mean, people were heated, and this is a heated issue. And I mean, I'm really torn about it because I don't know how to feel. I feel certain ways that I'm not sure. Am I racist, or you know, I'm just not really sure how to feel about it. And one thing
You're
that
not racist.
that I keep hearing from the FSM consulate is this idea that when we talk about FSM migrants or people of FSM descent living on Guam who commit crimes, we're somehow saying that all of them are committing crimes. And we're not talking about all of them. We're talking about, I feel like we're talking about the ones who,
Yeah.
there's a problem. Why are we pretending there's not a problem, or why are we tippy-toeing around
We shouldn't.
this fact? Yeah, so.
We arrest Chamorro criminals for the crimes they commit, and we
Right.
call them out.
Right.
So
But we don't have a town hall about it.
Why
We don't
not?
have a
Well-
town hall about why are Chamorros doing this.
Well,
It's
because I
crazy.
haven't seen a Chamorro wielding a machete in the community in quite a while.
Oh, we've wielded our share
Well,
of
There-
machetes.
no, historically that's
Yeah.
for sure. But
Well,
I mean,
part of-
my mom lives on that street, right?
Right,
It
yeah.
happened. It started right across at
Right,
Best Store.
yeah.
Unfortunately, you know, I talked to the owners and they were kind of freaking out about the whole thing. And to, unfortunately, the race of the individuals who did this is part of the whole thing. So when we talk about it, and we talk about their community is still trying to integrate into ours. You know, the Filipinos have been here for so many decades. And our cultures are so similar that it really wasn't a hard match, right? It was we
But
integrated
when
easily.
we first
This
came,
is
there was a
culture-
lot of conflict too.
Sure, but
Right.
I'm saying
But-
we've been here long enough to where things have
Yeah.
kind of
And
settled
is
down.
that
maybe.
the solution?
But-
Do we just
but-
need to wait?
No,
and
no,
come
no.
to
No, we
a-
need
I
to be
think
proactive.
what part of the problem is that when we came, we had some kind of status. We were either green card holders or we were U.S. citizens.
Right.
But for the FSM,
Mhm.
they're not.
Yeah.
They don't have. They're not green card holders and they're not U.S. citizens, but they have the privilege to come here. And
Yeah.
I
Right.
think that's part of the grief that a lot of the community members have. Is that
Sure, but I mean, there's nothing we can do about that now. So what do we do about the negative side effects? You know, the negative impacts that do take place.
I want to hear what Mike thinks, because this is something that I don't really hear your group talking about is immigration. And I mean, but to me, it really is a decolonization issue.
yeah.
It is. It is. This is one of the reasons why previously when you had people like Joe Ada pushing for a Commonwealth, they wanted the control over immigration because you cannot basically say that you're self-governing if you can't decide who can come in and who can come
Yeah.
out of your territory. And so, yes, for independent Guahan, sort of decolonizing and then developing sort of a relationship with the FSM, which is between two entities, as opposed to where we have it now, where
Right. Yeah.
where
Between the U.S.
stuff
and
happens,
the
the
FSM.
U.S. and so when Governor Calvo or Governor Liu say we're going to deport people, and then the U.S. State Department says you're the governor of a territory, you can't deport
Yeah.
anyone. If we want to deport people, we do it, but not you. Decolonizing and getting a real relationship, I think it would definitely help, because then you could still have people from the FSM coming into Guam and sort of enjoying certain privileges, but it would be part of a negotiated agreement. Because that's always that issue. We get affected by all these things where no one asked us what we wanted. We didn't sit at the table.
Sure. Whether it's the
then
programmatic
we-
agreement or the compact
Right.
impact agreement,
And-
and I want to end it on Julius here, because you know we went over our time. We talk about this agreement, this compact impact agreement, but there are things in there that say what
There's
people who come here are supposed to do. So
Right.
Yeah,
we have that in place. Why aren't we enforcing it?
and I'm glad you brought that
Yeah.
up because and again, this is where it gets very contentious. And people are like, oh, you know, you brought it up earlier. It's racist. Like, it's not racist. You know, we welcomed them despite the fact that we weren't invited to the table, so there's nothing we can do about it. So let's work with it. Yes, there were requirements, and they're not being followed. And unfortunately, it's
Too bad, so
it's a
sad.
strain. It's a strain on our resources.
Too bad, so sad. Get out of here.
Right? It's a strain in our resources,
Right.
and the
Right,
contention
yeah.
between the
Yeah.
communities arises when there's that pressure on the resources. How do we help our people? We're supposed to be helping them. So, and I don't think enough of their leadership in the positive side. I don't think enough of their voices have been heard, because there are leaders in their community that actively go out and they try to
Great
get,
work
Yeah.
out there, and they're out on and you don't hear about it because they're too busy out there trying to change things. That's another thing that people say, oh, what about their community? They're not. They are doing
Yeah,
things.
they
They
are.
know this is an issue, and they're out there trying to change it.
but for us to not even talk about it because we're worried about being
Yeah.
called racist, like, no, this is our, and this is where I become, like, what Chamorro would say, this is our home. And we didn't invite them here, but we're doing our best to be gracious hosts. And when individuals come and take advantage of it or just flat out disrespect it, I appreciated what Gov Calvo was doing, was deporting these criminals, sending them back to their country, saying, you need to deal with these people because we're helping the people that actually want to help themselves. And these
And then
people are
there's
coming here committing crimes,
Right.
and most of the crimes they commit are against your own people. And it's really sad when you sit down and you analyze it. Out of all the violent crimes in Guam, the Chuukese community specifically commit 30% of them, and it's like, how can we help them reduce that number? I mean, I want to help them. I
Yeah,
really do.
but I'm tired of it,
But the concerns are so contentious to talk about. People start to get mad. It's like we cannot. It's
No,
like
I
a
think-
relationship. Like,
yeah.
babe, how can we fix this if all we're doing is yelling at each other?
Right. Yeah.
You know.
I think that there's this idea in this millennial society where if you are even talking about race, it's racist.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we're not. I mean, yeah, they're Chuukese or yeah, they're from the FSM,
Yeah,
but that's
yeah.
not why they're doing the
No,
things.
no, it's not.
And I
It's
think that's part of
individuals
the
in
big
the
problem. Is that,
community.
I mean, if we're just talking about race and not, assigning any negative light because of the race, like I'm not saying that they're out there macheting people because they're Chuukese. I'm not saying that.
No.
But I mean, it is part of the conversation, whether you're Chamorro or whatever. I mean, race is something that we just can't escape it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And to just tippy toe and not mention it, I think it's kind of different, right?
Yeah. You identify it so you can.
Because we've all got our opinions about race, and
You wanna
and you're
fight,
right, Nerissa. I've seen this generationally, right? So you go back to the Filipinos came. I mean, the Filipinos used to be the Chuukese of Guam, where it
Yes.
was just like that. You know what I mean? And then it was the Palauans, and
Yeah, and then we
Right.
moved up.
right.
And
So
now
there's
we kept
always
moving up
coming
as
to take them.
newcomers
Right,
came.
right, yeah. So
But I really think at the end of the day, there's a huge cultural differences in how we live how they live their lives in their countries and how we live our lives in Guam. And I think that's a big part of the solution is,
right.
you know,
Yeah, but I don't know if like I hear we talk about these cultural differences, but I don't think their culture is to go attack people with machetes.
no, and
I
I'm
just
not even
don't
talking
think-
about the violence. I'm
Yeah.
just talking about in general. You know what I mean? Because when we talk about alcohol, it's like it's somewhat new, and we can't really appreciate that because alcohol has been on Guam for a long time.
Right. Yeah.
So it's like, how do we address, just like, the meth problem in
I
Guam?
mean, to some of these guys, alcohol is like PCP.
That's what I mean.
I mean,
And again,
they
it's
take it
not-
to a whole other level.
It's not the community, it's the individuals in this community that have issues. The individuals in the Chamorro community, in the Filipino community, Chuukese, Yapis, whatever. It's the individuals, it's not the race.
And that's why I kind of want to go back to that point that the consul Teresa Philippines said that, hey, not all, and I hate the word Micronesians because we're all Micronesians, right?
Micronesians
Yeah.
too,
So
yeah.
she says not all FSM migrants or people of FSM
Of course.
descent commit crimes. Yes, we're not talking about
Yeah.
those. We're talking about the ones that do. So.
Yeah, let's keep the conversation focused on
Right,
that.
yeah. And on that note, I want to thank you, Nerissa, for coming by. Always good insight to hear your opinion.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
And I wanna follow up on this Klitsky abortion thing, and then we'll bring you back on because I know you got
Okay.
strong feelings about
Sure.
that. Dr. Bevacqua, it was good. I felt like we kind of did a little decolonization 101, right? So that was cool. Julius, always a pleasure.
Always the elephant in the room.
Right? Hey, you need a counterpoint, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
My name's Chris. This has been the after party. Remember, last Monday of every month and second Monday of every month. Until then, we'll see you again. Hasta adios.